The sailors on this ship were absolutely brilliant in the basics in 1805. But then, just 7 years later, they were not. They were not. The HMS Victory in 1805 was part of the fleet that beat the Spanish and the French in the Battle of Trafalgar, and it effectively crowned the British as the world's most powerful navy. I took a tour of the ship, and a tour guide pulled me aside and he said, I'm going to tell you something that I usually don't tell American tourists. He said the commander, Lord Horatio Nelson, was fanatical about the basics, and as a result, so was the entire crew. It would take 10 or 15 men to fire each cannon, reload, and fire again. And like clockwork, these teams would fire every single one of the 104 cannons every 60 to 90 seconds. The French and the Spanish, on the other hand, they fired each of their cannons every 6 to 10 minutes. But during that Battle of Trafalgar, Nelson, the commander, the leader, was killed by a sniper on deck. And just 7 years later, the British fleet would face off with the Americans, the War of 1812. But at that point, everything had flipped. The Americans were firing each of their cannons every 60 to 90 seconds, while the British fired only every 6 to 9 minutes. In the tour guide's words, the Brits had become fat, dumb, and happy. They were once brilliant in the basics, but just 7 years later, they were not. When you hire a new employee, I bet you communicated the expectations with brilliance, but perhaps that clarity faded over time. First time you ran a meeting, first time you coached a sport or taught a class, decided to build an important family routine or tradition, I bet you were brilliant in the basics, but then, over time, perhaps you were not. When you first were dating your spouse, you were probably brilliant in the basics, and then a few years went by. Is it time to pick one area of your life and say, I will once again become brilliant in the basics? Maybe it's your morning routine or healthy eating habits or the way you approach fitness, or maybe it's the way you learn and study, how you pay attention to other people. The passion in your communications, the way you ask questions, how you wait once you ask a question to engage others. Give them a chance to answer. Let them know that you want to hear their ideas. Become brilliant in the basics again. There's a massive gap between pretty good and being brilliant in the basics. Where are you pretty good right now? But it's time to become brilliant.